Hello and welcome back to Manibil. I wanted to make another video on my on my ontology because I've done some, let's see, optimization or clarification of how to approach it. And my ontology is a work in progress, right? This might be subject to change or improvement or whatever you want to call it. But this is because I wanted, first of all, to add the idea of cognition, or not cognition, but a cognitive apparatus as a part of the system of the ontology, right? And what occurred to me was something that was, one thing took the other, so to say, right? And you might want to go back to get a deep understanding of my thoughts about this particular ontology. In my series on my ontology, the ABC rule, right? In a recent series within the last month, to get a better understanding and also some reflections on what potential isms you could end up with: dualism, realism, materialism, idealism, whatever, physicalism, and so on, right? In various follow-ups to that particular video. This might be another follow-up in that series, or it may be a standalone video. I'm not sure how I will classify it as of yet. But as I mentioned in that original video on my ontology, I have three main categories. Category A is qualia, category B is cognition, and category C is basically everything else, which is I call abstractions, right? Now that, just to remind you that the last category, abstractions, is a huge category where everything else is basically lumped together. And this is for simplicity's sake. I could possibly go down at some point and further subcategorize abstractions into a number of different categories, right? Obviously, subconscious is not the same thing as ethics. These are different categories, so to say, right? But the point of category C, and I label them abstractions, they are all there because of category A or B, right? And B is only there because category A. And it's this structure I find to be of excruciating importance, because it limits my possibility of just throwing around various stuff and create a weird ontology, right? This is a very, very, very strict approach. And I like strictness in my philosophy. I don't like just a bunch of words, right? My philosophy is for me. I'm not trying to convince somebody else about my philosophy. My philosophy does not hang upon whether or not I can convince somebody else of my correctness or the correctness of it. Philosophy is not a convincing game. Philosophy is my thinking about what I am and how I function, so to say, right? In all aspects of what it could possibly be. Because when you really think about it, and this is also because I've been trying to think about some metaphilosophy actually, right? And that's why I came sort of back to ontology, that what comes first is sort of the old chicken and egg thing, right? Did philosophy come first or did ontology come first? Do I need an ontology in order to understand philosophy? or what to do with philosophy? Or do I need to philosophize before I create an ontology? And is there something between starting to philosophize and ontology? I will actually say there is, but I'm sort of trying to, if you have some ideas, please illuminate me, right? I'm thinking that would be what would be called meta-philosophy. It's sort of the first steps into doing philosophy. And it's not merely a purpose description or a definition of what philosophy is and what am I doing when I'm doing philosophy. It's actually particular steps I need to go through, or some rules I'm setting myself for what I am allowed to do when I'm actually philosophizing, right? It's sort of the manual, the step-by-step manual for how to philosophize. That would be meta-philosophy, at least in my book, right? So what rules would there be? And I haven't done any clear thinking about it yet, right? But there might be something like, if I've settled on using a term for a particular aspect, I have to use that same term all the time. I can't call it first ontology and then start to call it metaphysics, right? If I'm using another term, that term has to be defined for something unique or clearly that is different from everything else used, right? I can't just start to throw words at myself, right? And you could also say, if I'm sitting here in my living room, do I really need words to describe it? I know I'm sitting here presenting a video on it, and therefore I need words, because otherwise it would be a very silent movie, right? Not that interesting, possibly. Both in audible fashion and in visual fashion on the presentation here, right? So it's like, when I'm categorizing, I think that if you're going to do good philosophy, it needs to be a combination of writing it down for yourself or doing some audio thing like I'm doing here. Audio visual, right? And combined with thinking. Where the writing is how you make sure that you keep all the thinking you have done under the way, right? If I try to recall what I was thinking in a particular day, 2 years ago, I can't. Maybe it's because of my age, but I can't recall. I mean, sometimes I can't even recall the video I did 2 weeks ago, right? What the hell was I talking about? All these videos start to float together in some, weird picture, right? Or not weird, but you know what I mean. So it's all about making sure to myself that I don't delude myself, that I don't fall for any kind of fallacy or any trap like, I'm going to go in that direction because I would really like it. I'm going to pick this as my reduction base because I like that to be my reduction base. I don't want to do that. I want to do the best possible philosophy that I'm can possibly do, right? And then some, right? I keep honing my philosophy. And if I have a sense there's some weakness or something lacking, or there's a part that I haven't done sufficiently, I keep coming back to it, right? And try to improve it and hone it, and make it, simplify it to a format that is functional, that it doesn't become too bloated or cumbersome and so on, right? And that's why I've sort of optimized my ontology as a sort of side effect of my sort of meta-philosophical thoughts, right? So I wanted to share that with you, right? What I have done is I have added the idea of the cognitive apparatus, and I talked about it in the earlier video, I'm pretty sure. Excuse me. And what came to me was that the both the cognitive apparatus, as I presented it here in the scheme or in the schematics, and the awareness, these are the intermediate steps between each of the categories. You see? There are certain things that, the Legos sort of came together in a way that I was sort of, oh my God, that's kind of interesting. I suppose I'm on the right track here, right? Now, this is still a simplified overview of what is going on, right? If you take and I could show you, I have seen a picture of the scientific diagram of how the mind works, or the brain works, or however you want to, what label you want to put on it. And it's extremely complicated. It is next level complication, right? And you can work on that, right? You can work with that in a philosophical manner, right? Because philosophy is about everything hanging together, right? But this is a map. Ontology is basically a map of what is going on. And you could put a big, circle around all of this and call it mind, right? But that would only be a synthetic term I'm using in order to not. Ontology is the thinking, the description, the philosophy. But mind is sort of, okay, this is where everything is. Rather than saying qualia, cognitions and abstractions and color, sound, the earth, Eiffel Tower, imagination, awareness, I just say mind, right? In my mind, then it's somewhere, some of these parts in these phenomena, right? You could say phenomena, but that's more directly pointing to a particular aspect, right? While mind is just, a catch-all term for all that. And that's where sort of a dude like Bernardo Castro goes wrong and say, well, then I guess everything is made of mind then, he says, right? That doesn't work. You can't do that, right? That's a violation of the categories, as I pointed out in a recent series, right? Okay. So what I've also done is clarifying a bit more what I mean by experience. And I've decided to myself that it makes very much sense to say that qualia, only the qualia is that which I call experience, right? While the cognition is somewhere between my experience and my, as I call, insperience. But the abstractions and that which I'm aware of, or that which my awareness creates imaginations and reality and theories and emotions and promises, memory, dreams, and so on, right? All based on these particular qualia cognitions or memories of qualias and cognitions, right? So memories of prior qualia cognition that all sorts of are responsible somehow for all what is going on in category C abstractions, right? So experience is qualia, right? That's experience. That's a way to use the terms, right? So if I try to henceforth, until I change potentially this ontology, right? And the labels I use. When I say experience, I mean qualia, right? Doesn't go for past videos necessarily, but hopefully from videos from now on and into the future, right? Okay, so what I have done is I have been so nasty and contrary to my prior statements, saying you can't use knowledge in ontology. And it's because I haven't found a good word for the category B, cognitions, in sort of philosophical category term. But ultimately, maybe I should call it empiricism, but I don't like that because that's also a term used in knowledge, right? But what my philosophy ultimately ends up with is that cognitions are knowledge. That's the only thing that can become knowledge, right? But it's not the best term to use. I'm still trying to find a better term because I don't like terms because ontology is a particular, as I pointed out several times, according to my deconstructions of Bernardo Castro in particular, that epistemology and knowledge has nothing to do in ontology. But when I have done this ontology, and I'm doing my epistemology, I have to look back on my ontology in order to say, okay, this particular aspect or category of my ontology is what I will call knowledge. And to me, my epistemology is that cognitions are knowledge. But I need to come up with a better term than knowledge there, because it's a very poor choice, not least because I've criticized deeply Bernardo Castro's misuse of epistemology and the term knowledge in his presentation of his ontology, right? So, I'll leave it there, right? So, I'll get back to you on this, right, at a later point. But what it points at is empiricism. And I think empiricism is the idea that knowledge can only be gained through experience. And using the term experience in the sense that it refers to qualia, as I've done up here, right? You have to have direct experience in order to have knowledge. You can only have knowledge when you have direct experience. At least one of the qualia in your experience, set of experiences, right? At least one, and I would say you need color, but it might be subject to change, but I think you need color in order to have full cognition, right? Therefore, it makes perfect sense to me to say that cognitions are knowledge, because that's what you mean by empiricism. You might have a different ontology, a different epistemology, and so on, and you have a different understanding of knowledge. I probably wouldn't agree with you, but I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, right? This is my way of doing it. It makes perfect sense to me, right? And it also makes sense to me because cognitions is sort of a middle. It's a intermediate step between direct experience and then everything else that goes on. That is usually what you care about, right? Your understanding of a reality, or what you have of principles, and you have a memory of this and that. You're reasoning and you're dreaming and you have a psychology and doing philosophy and so on, right? But the cognitions are also very important because that's the interest. That's what is functional for survival. If you don't take your cognition seriously, you're not going to survive, in my opinion. And then all your abstractions doesn't matter anyway, right? So this intermediate step, cognitions, is of absolutely excruciatingly importance, right? Trying to stress it. But it sort of sit there between qualia and abstractions. And I mean, it makes perfect sense. It fits like hand in glove to say, then cognitions are knowledge, right? And how it works is, the qualia is sort of sifted through a cognitive apparatus. And out of that cognitive apparatus pops out various cognitions that are then placed sort of, maybe they're not placed, but they are identified within the qualia spatial qualia scaffolding or placement of experiences, like, lamp, television, loudspeaker, whatever, right? Table, laptop. It constantly is sifted through the cognitive apparatus in order to cognize various aspects of your experience, right? And then to me, it makes sense to say that is knowledge, and only that it's knowledge. Everything else is something else than knowledge, right? It's also binary. There is no is that an elephant or is it not an elephant? Well, if you cognize elephant, it's a fucking elephant. Now, there might be if I go to an art exhibition, let's say, right, and I experience elephant on a painting, it's not the same as if I go and experience an elephant on the African savannah, unless there's a painting there, right? It's not the same elephant, but it's still elephant in a conceptual or in a cognitive manner, right? So there's a reason why my mind has been trained to identify elephant, because elephant is important, even if there's not an elephant, right? The mind is not, it's up to my rationalizations and further discovery of qualia about this particular elephant, so to say, that makes me go and judge whether or not I should, what is it, the four F's, right? Fighting, fleeing, fucking, and feeding, right? Should I fight it? Should I flee from it? Should I fuck it? Or should I feed on it, right? It's like, okay, if I go and touch it, it doesn't feel like an elephant, right? And if I sniff it, it smells like paint rather than... So it's probably not the kind of elephant I'm looking for. But that doesn't take away from it that I was cognizing elephant. So in that sense, I know elephant. Because you could you could see it this way, that if I was going to excuse me, if I was going to agree with somebody, well, could you paint an elephant for me, right? Then, or if I ask somebody to make a painting to me of an elephant, I would like to be able to cognize elephant on the painting. If I'm not cognizing elephant, I would probably say, I have a trouble, I don't see the elephant, right? Now, there might be sort of a gray area in the sense that, okay, if I expect there to be an elephant and I keep looking for an elephant, at some point I might find an elephant because I want to see an elephant. If you're looking at a Jackson Pollock painting, all of a sudden you start to see fireworks, or you see beavers, or see, it's so abstract that you can almost see anything. So there might be sort of a gray area, but in at that end of the spectrum, it's perfectly up to you to decide what you want to cognize, so to say, right? But in the everyday sense of the word, I would say the cognitions are knowledge, right? I don't want it to be a part of, I don't want the term knowledge or empiricism to be a part of my ontology, but I'm still looking for a better way to label this in the same stream as experience and inexperience, right? Inexperience might not be the best term to use. And even I don't even need these terms because I have described the ontology over here, but it's nice to have some terms to use if you need to refer back to whatever is going on, rather than saying Eiffel Tower, beaver, soft ice, pizza, ocean. It's better to say knowledge or whatever term I'll come up with, right? Or if you have some suggestion, please let me have it. I'm struggling to find the term here, right? I like the idea that between each category, there is something going on that enables the next category. Otherwise, it might feel to me like I'm just coming up with categories sort of on the fly because I want it, right? But if there's some cornerstone aspect of how my mind works, in a sense, that fits perfectly at that particular step, it makes it more plausible for me that I'm on the right track and going in the right direction. I'm doing something that is functional in my ontology if I can do that. And I feel that the cognitive apparatus, that is one of the... I'm not bowing down on that one, I think, right? You will really have to have some seriously good arguments, right? And it's also... it explains the idea of concepts, right? Because concepts is that which is in the cognitive apparatus that enables Earth, Eiffel Tower, beaver, soft ice, pizza, ocean, and so on. These concepts, however they work, is a part of the system of the cognitive apparatus. And if I'm sit there and try to make myself aware of an elephant without actually experiencing an elephant, I am sort of using my awareness tapping in to the cognitive apparatus, which is always there, waiting to be able to cognize, right? And say, give me an elephant, right? And then I get this ghostly idea of an elephant presented in front of me, right? Or, presented, it's not presented, but still, right? If I imagine an elephant, it's almost as if it's the mind places it within the experience, right? But it's very ghostly in this sort of Hume's weak vivacity and strong vivacity. I identify those as the concepts is his weak vivacity, the ideas, and the impressions are the actual elephant. If you go and experience an actual elephant, you have the strong vivacity. But then there's this gray area when you experience an elephant on a painting. That's not necessarily kind of elephant you're looking for, but in my opinion, you're still cognizing that elephant. So you still know elephant, even though it's not maybe the kind of elephant or the quality of elephant you're looking for, right? Looking back at the qualia that are involved in your cognition of that particular elephant. So this all brings together in a very simple fashion, qualia, cognitions, concepts, knowledge, and experience, right? Without going into any harebrained ideas about the ripples and minds and beyond my mind and, all that consciousness and so on, it's not necessary. And another thing is, they are all derivatives of qualias and cognitions, right? So all qualia and cognition always comes before all of the rest. You might want to have a different ontology than I have. I encourage you to go and do it for yourself, right? As I pointed out, my category C abstractions is very, very complex, right? There's a lot of shit lumped into there, into it, right? But that is for the sake of simplicity, as I said, because what I'm really interested in is making sure that I have a full overview of category A and B. They are fleshed out completely and very strictly, without any discrepancy, nothing can touch them, right? That's not necessarily the case with category C, except that everything that is in category C cannot be a part of B or A. But category C can possibly, very, very likely, I would say almost sure that they can be further categorized in maybe category D and category E, or maybe C1 and C2 and C3 and C4 or whatever, right? But however I might end up. But at this point, I'm not really interested in doing that, because that's not what I'm looking for. As I pointed out to you earlier, the next step up after ontology would be metaphysics. I would have to say, how about an external world? Then I will go and fabulate about that black area up there before or above in my schematics here, in my table here, before qualia. That black area, that black dark ocean without a shore, right? How about that? Is that something I need to deal with, right? I don't need category C for that. Because category C is a particular category down here, right? That follow from A and B. So I would have to do some special kind of philosophy to deal with that, right? The next step after ontology / metaphysics is knowledge. But I have perfectly well identified knowledge as being cognitions. So I don't need the rest down there in order to go and do epistemology and get to knowledge. I've already done that. I come back and label this as knowledge, though that is a bit against my usual approach to presenting this, right? Knowledge is not a part of ontology, but this is sort of to cut the corner short, right? So this block over there to the right of category B leads to epistemology. And epistemology and knowledge is necessary for objectivity, right? Objectivity might lead to an approach to an external world, right? And that would go for the same that same thing would go for ethics and morality. It is pointing about my actions, which is based on observations of qualia and cognitions, right? I move my arm, colors and cognitions. I experience the elephant, qualia and cognition, and so on, right? At what point do all these imaginations of reality, theory, emotion, ethics, they are a bubble of shit going on in the awareness, so to say, that I use to make decisions about my actions, right? And for instance, philosophize. They are not a part, they cannot, ethics cannot, I have ethics down here in my awareness because it's, as I said, a big category, right? It might need a bit of clarification. But ethics is what I do in order to get to moral principle. But ethics is not, I'm not using category C as an explanation of ethics. I'm placing ethics in a category, but the ethics is dealing with category B and category A, right? So there's a difference between what is going on in a particular abstraction, for instance. If an abstraction only deals with what is contained in what is done in the abstraction, deals with category A and B, it's still an abstraction in category C, but it only deals with, for instance, category A and B, right? Which would be possibly knowledge, only deals with qualia and cognitions, right? But the idea of knowledge, or the abstraction knowledge, the philosophy knowledge, or epistemology, is a class C abstraction. But it only deals with category A and B. Do you see where I'm getting? So, that's why I have this very strong distinction between A and B, and then category C is just lumped together down there, right? It makes everything so much more simple, right? That's just a sort of a side effect, and I'm happy that it's simple, right? It's not because I like it. I'm not using it because of its simplicity. If it was hugely complicated, I would have to do that, right? But I think, maybe I have a tendency to make things concise and simple, or simplify it so that it's not more complicated than it needs to be. But I also make sure that I'm not oversimplifying things. And I don't think I have it because I'm very precise about category A and B, and then I'm just shoved everything else into category C. And I don't need the rest in order to do the rest of my philosophy. I can think about what is going on with these abstractions and how I use them to go about handling my category A and B. But they in the ontological one-way rule, all category C abstractions are dependent on their being A and B. Either in the now, or in the past, or maybe in the future, right? And the idea of time is also some kind of abstraction, right? Based on a combination of memories and, whatever, right, going on in category C. So, I think this is very functional, to be honest, right? I really like this, and I don't want to say that because liking a philosophy is not an argument, but it's kind of encouraging that you can approach what is going on in a very simple and effective manner. I won't at this point. I probably am. As somebody commenting on my videos, that Nietzsche have said that your philosophy sort of is some kind of extension or expression of who you are, right? If you're a very brainy person, you might create, 17 epicycles of mental abstractions to explain your philosophy. But if you're a very down-to-earth kind of concise and simple guy who wants to get to some results, You might not want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. And I'm sort of in the latter category, right? So, yes, I guess I can't rule out that my philosophy is sort of an expression of who I am and how I work. But I try not to, I don't want to oversimplify, right? Because basically you could say I'm not a I don't like to go into that dualism or monism or pluralism or all these isms that you can align yourself with. I don't like it. Sometimes it's necessary to express how I'm thinking by using an ism, but as soon as I do it, I'm being stamped as one of these crazy who believe in that kind of ism, right? And I don't want to be put in a cage somewhere and say he's one of those, right? It sort of limits my ability to. It doesn't, but if it's isms are dangerous, right? Because you might your need to be in allegiance with somebody else who's have a similar kind of thinking might make you dogmatic about your philosophy. And that's one thing you don't want to be. You don't want to be dogmatic, right? You really want to be free to think and change all the time. It's a very big problem, I think, if you read a philosopher who has had the same kind of thinking for 20 years without any changes. There's a problem. Because then they're not philosophers, right? They have found an explanation and they stick to that because they need it and they don't want to change it because, right? I'm constantly changing and improving and honing and clarifying and so on, right? As you see, this is possibly the fifth version of my ontology within the last couple of months, right? But each time I do it, it's like it gets clearer and clearer and more concise and more strict and more, easier to understand, and you get rid of the superfluous fat and so on, right? And some terms that are used in philosophical terms that are used, are fitting the picture and putting the Legos together in a coherent manner that is sort of, this seems to work, right? I like that kind of approach. That's what a real philosopher does, in my opinion. Those who have, you take Bernardo Castro, it's the same fucking story he tells every time, right? About that cockpit and the dials. He's used that metaphor for 10 years. And every time somebody asks him, well, imagine you're sitting in a cockpit. I mean, it just seems dogmatic to me, right? Another thing is, why the hell would you want to start your ontology with a metaphor? That's just about the only thing you don't want to. You want to describe what there is. Stanford, the quote up there at the top of my presentation, doesn't say start off with a metaphor, right? No, it says what there is. Well, this is what there is in my experience, right? In my phenomena, these are my phenomena. Study of what there is. Another way to say that it's an identification, clarification, a classification, and interdependencies of my phenomena. That's ontology. Ontology is not, I think I will come up with this shit that can explain everything. Oh, there is a problem somebody is trying to tackle. I think I will answer that problem. That's not ontology. In that sense, a guy like Bernardo Castro is completely misguided. He doesn't understand what he's doing. And I guess that's because academic philosophy is so fucked up beyond recognition that nobody actually knows what the hell they're doing, right? It is philosophy has become so overbloated and confused that to be an academic philosopher, you have to find yourself a pet subject. It is near impossible to encompass all the weird philosophy that is being done. Look at the latest book or the upcoming book of Bernardo Castro, just to give a short list, or what's it called? A resume. No? What's it called? Let's say resume of his ontology, it takes him 176 pages just to give you an overview of his ontology. 176 fucking pages, man, right? I mean, do I need 176 pages for this? I have made a one-pager, and I'm talking to you, and I hope it makes a kind of sense. And you can reflect or identify various aspects of your own experience in this, right? Give me a break. Why would I want to spend 176 pages just to elaborate on this? It would be completely overblown, right? It wouldn't be in concordance with the simplicity of the diagram I've created here, right? I wouldn't need 176 pages. If I needed 176 pages to explain this, it's because I didn't explain it. It's fucked up from the starting point. And that's why I need to go into all sorts of weird epicycles of imaginations and abstractions and so on in order to convince myself I have explained it, right? Another thing is that you can't explain something that is a description of what there is. What there is inexplicable, right? You can't explain reality. You can't explain Eiffel Tower, right? You can't explain color. It's just what there is. There might be, to some extent, that you can explain something within abstractions, and it depends on the terms you're using and how you use them and what it entails and so on, maybe. But at least when we're dealing with category A and B, there is no explanatory power anywhere. It's just a reflection of what there is. That is what is ontology. And if somebody tries to say something else to you, they're fucking with you, right? Okay, I think that's enough for today. I sincerely want to have your comments, and if you have a good idea for a term to use over here in the noumena area over here, in the phenomena area here about a term for between experience and inexperience, then let me have it, right? Let me have it. But otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.